Well, as we head into our final week of the Gospel of Matthew, we'll be reading in the final week of Jesus' life before his crucifixion. And chapter 21, which we read last week, ends with some conflict with the religious leaders as Jesus tells a parable about people who aren't giving the master his due and pointing directly at them. Chapter 22 begins with more conflict. Really, this whole week of reading is a constant march, a steady progress toward the cross, which is the point of this whole Jesus thing, is for him to be the lamb, to be the sacrifice. And so it's this constant march of him toward the cross. He finds himself in constant conflict with the religious leaders, but in the midst of that conflict, he has a purpose. And his purpose is to call them out of trusting in their own goodness to trusting in him. And then we'll find that when he interacts with people who aren't confident in their own goodness, sinners as it were, he is constantly telling them that while they have no hope in their own goodness, they can find hope in him. And so as you read this, kind of keep that in mind as you go through the week. Chapter 22 is constant conflict with the leaders. He tells parables, they ask questions, he asks them questions. And so it's constant conflict as he goes through that. 23 is even more conflict. He speaks what's known as the seven woes, where he says, woe to the Pharisees and teachers of the law, woe to these people, woe to that. And these are hard for us to understand because they have a lot of detail that you have to study what the life of a religious leader was like to understand. Know this, that there was no doubt in the minds of the religious leaders that in Jesus' mind they were in trouble. They had done things they shouldn't have done. They had lost the main point of the faith. They had a kind of a continuation of his cleansing of the temple. They had taken something that was supposed to be a good and gracious gift and had made it into a law. And so he goes on to talk about that. 24 is a difficult chapter. It talks about the end of the world and signs of the end of the age. Just keep in mind that as Jesus speaks about these signs of the end of the age, he is actually speaking about history that's been going on since his ascension. Nations rising against nation, earthquakes, famines, all of those things have been going on, which lead to sort of the next section in chapter 24, verse 36, that no one really knows the day and the hour. The signs are all there now. Jesus could come back at any time. And so he talks about what it means to be faithful and wise and to be ready. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in chapter 25. But at the end of chapter 24, Jesus kind of blows the mind of his disciples when he talks about the temple being destroyed. They think that the temple is going to play an even more prominent role in the life of Israel. When the Messiah comes, the temple will be even more important. But Jesus talks about it being destroyed. He talks about all of those things. And then he is pointing them to the fact that he is a better temple. He is the presence of God in their midst, which is what the temple represented. So we have that in chapter 24. Chapter 25, Jesus talks about readiness. And what does it mean to be ready when the bridegroom comes? Or what does it mean to be ready when the master comes home? Or all of those things. And as you read those two parables, understand that then his sheep and the goats analogy gives us a sense of what that means. He's talking about readiness as faith. Readiness as faith. So if you have faith in Jesus, you're ready. And then he talks about now faith as action, so that my beliefs impact what I do. And so when he talks about the goats and the sheep, the goats being those who don't believe, they thought they did these things, but they didn't. And they thought they knew Jesus, but they did not do those things. People who did know Jesus didn't even realize they were doing those things. And so he talks about how faith is readiness. 26, 27 are all the history and the story of Jesus' crucifixion, his trial. Read that. If you have any questions, go ahead and write those down. Then the chapter ends, the book ends with this great section that we call the Great Commission. And what it is that Jesus is giving the church, you and me, our marching orders. And what he's saying is that we are to go out, make disciples, teaching and baptizing, that people would know who Jesus is. And he gives us a great word of promise at the end that says, I will be with you always. When you go out and risk, I will be there. When you take chances, when you share the gospel, when you talk about me, I will be there, and nothing will separate me from you. So that's the Gospel of Matthew. We will be moving into the Old Testament book of Genesis following this week. Hopefully the book of Matthew was instructive to you. If you have any questions, don't be afraid to email me, and I'll do what I can to try to answer those. Thank you.